I've never really been a revenge person. I'm not the type to slash tires, start rumors, or plot some elaborate movie-style comeback. Most of the time, when somebody's awful to me, I just cut them off and move on with my life. But there was one moment, one tiny, painfully awkward moment that still makes me smile whenever I think about it. And honestly, it worked because it was so simple. It all started back in high school. I went to a small, private Christian school in the suburbs, the kind of school where everybody knew everybody's business before first period even started. Rumors spread faster than the flu, teachers acted overly cheerful all the time, and students somehow managed to be both deeply sheltered and unbelievably cruel at the same time. If you didn't fit into the school's perfect little mold, people noticed immediately. That's where my friend Ethan came in. Ethan and I became friends freshman year after getting assigned to the same history project. Back then, he was still figuring himself out, but even before he came out as trans, you could tell he felt uncomfortable trying to play the role everybody expected from him. He was artistic, quiet, funny in a dry, sarcastic way, and honestly, one of the kindest people I've ever known. A few years into high school, Ethan came out as trans and started using he/him pronouns along with a new name. I remember how nervous he was telling people. We were sitting outside during lunch when he finally blurted it out, like he was expecting the world to explode. Instead, I just said, "Okay, cool." He stared at me. "That's it? What else am I supposed to say?" He laughed so hard he nearly spit out his soda. But while most of our friend group adjusted pretty quickly, not everybody at school reacted well, especially a guy named Tyler. Tyler was one of those dudes who peaked socially at 16 and treated the school hallways like his personal kingdom. Loud, arrogant, always surrounded by other equally annoying guys laughing way too hard at mediocre jokes. He wasn't even particularly clever as a bully, just relentless. The kind of person who repeated the same insult over and over because getting a reaction entertained him. Once Ethan transitioned publicly, Tyler became obsessed with bothering him. Not physically violent or anything, just constant cruelty disguised as jokes, using Ethan's old name on purpose, overemphasizing she every time teachers weren't listening, making fake, confused comments like, "Wait, what are we supposed to call you again today?" Stuff designed specifically to humiliate someone while still giving himself plausible deniability. And honestly, watching it happen pissed me off more than it seemed to piss Ethan off. Maybe because Ethan had gotten used to it. That's the awful thing about bullying. Eventually, people stop reacting because reacting only encourages it. I remember one afternoon after gym class, Tyler loudly yelled Ethan's dead name across the locker room while his friends laughed hysterically. Ethan just kept stuffing books into his backpack like he didn't hear it. But later, while we walked to the parking lot together, he suddenly said quietly, "Sometimes I wish people could just forget who I used to be." That sentence stuck with me for years, because underneath all the sarcasm and resilience, he was exhausted from constantly being reminded that some people refused to see him for who he actually was. Tyler never understood that. To him, it was entertainment, something to joke about between classes. Meanwhile, Ethan was surviving. Eventually, high school ended, like it thankfully always does, and almost immediately everybody scattered. Some people went to college, some disappeared into random jobs, some got married weirdly young. Ethan got accepted into an art program out of state, and honestly thrived once he left that town. He finally found people who respected him fully, and watching him become more confident over time was incredible. Meanwhile, I stayed local for community college while working part-time. Life moved on. Or at least, I thought it had. Then, one Saturday afternoon, my family and I stopped at a Starbucks inside Target after running errands, and suddenly, I heard someone say, "Yo, no way, hey man." I looked up from my phone, and there he was, Tyler, standing behind the counter in a green apron.
For a second, I genuinely froze because it felt so weird seeing a high school bully in a normal adult setting, like spotting a raccoon working customer service. He looked mostly the same, just slightly older and more tired around the eyes. But the second he smiled at me, something instantly irritated me. Not because he worked there, there's nothing wrong with customer service jobs. It was the tone. Casual, friendly, like we were old buddies reconnecting after years apart, instead of people connected entirely by memories of him tormenting my friend. "Hey," Tyler said again, "have you been?" And maybe if he'd apologized, maybe if he'd shown literally any awareness whatsoever about how awful he used to be, things would have gone differently. But he acted completely normal, like history had magically reset itself. That's what annoyed me most. Bullies always seem shocked when people remember what they did, like they assume everybody should just move on because they moved on. Meanwhile, the people they targeted carry those memories forever. So standing there in line beside my parents and younger sister, watching Tyler grin at me like we shared happy nostalgia, I suddenly made a decision. A very petty decision. I smiled politely, then said, "Sorry, do I know you?"
The silence after I said that was incredible. Not dramatic movie silence, just this painfully awkward pause where Tyler's brain visibly stalled trying to process what had happened. His smile twitched slightly. "Oh, yeah," he said with an awkward laugh. "We went to school together." I tilted my head like I was genuinely confused. "Really?" Behind me, I heard my sister suddenly cough into her hand to hide laughter. She already knew exactly what I was doing. Tyler looked nervous now. "Yeah? St. Matthew's? We had English together senior year." I stared at him for another second, then shrugged apologetically. "Sorry, man, I honestly don't remember you." The look on his face was priceless. Not devastated or anything dramatic, just deeply uncomfortable, like someone had suddenly removed him from his own memory of reality. Because here's the thing about people like Tyler. They genuinely believe they mattered more in other people's lives than they actually did. Bullies think they're unforgettable, but most of the time, people remember them as background noise attached to bad memories. Tyler laughed again, weaker this time. "Damn, okay, that's awkward." I just smiled politely. "Yeah, sorry." My mom had turned completely away from the counter at this point because she was clearly trying not to laugh directly in the poor guy's face. Even my dad looked amused, and he usually misses social cues entirely. Tyler kept trying. You could tell he desperately wanted to recover the interaction somehow. "I used to hang out with Jason and them," he added quickly. Nothing. Blank stare. "Oh," I said. "Cool." The dude looked like he was slowly dying inside. And honestly, I regret absolutely nothing, because suddenly he was experiencing a tiny fraction of the discomfort he used to inflict on Ethan daily. That feeling of being unseen, dismissed, invalidated. Except, unlike Ethan, Tyler got to walk away from it after 5 minutes and continue his shift. Meanwhile, Ethan dealt with that emotional exhaustion for years. Tyler finally gave up trying to force recognition. "Well, anyway," he muttered awkwardly, turning toward the espresso machine, "what can I get you?" I ordered my drink like nothing unusual had happened, completely polite, completely calm, which somehow made the whole thing funnier. When he handed me my coffee a few minutes later, he tried one last time. "So, you seriously don't remember me?" I looked directly at him, then shrugged. "Sorry, dude." Absolute emotional destruction. My sister nearly walked into a display trying not to crack up. The second we got away from the counter, my entire family lost it. My mom grabbed my arm, laughing. "Oh my God, you are terrible." "You knew him?" my dad asked. I explained everything while we walked through the parking lot. About Ethan, about the bullying, about Tyler constantly misgendering him and using his old name on purpose just to humiliate him.
By the end of the story, my mom's expression had completely changed. "Good," she said immediately. "He deserved that." Even my dad nodded. People like that always think everybody forgets what they did. Exactly. That's what bothered me so much about the interaction. Not that Tyler spoke to me, it was the entitlement behind it, like he assumed time automatically erased accountability. And maybe he genuinely had changed. People do grow up sometimes. But if that was true, then where was the self-awareness? Where was the, "Hey, I was kinda awful back then," or "I owe some people apologies"? Instead, he approached me with full confidence, expecting casual friendliness, like we shared fond memories. We didn't. Every memory I had involving Tyler included Ethan looking exhausted. That stayed with me. A couple days later, I told Ethan the story over FaceTime. The second I got to the "sorry, do I know you" part, he burst out laughing so hard he disappeared off camera. "No way you actually did that." "I absolutely did." He laughed for like a full minute straight, then finally shook his head smiling. "That's so petty. I learned from the best." After the laughter settled though, Ethan got quieter. "You know what's weird?" he said thoughtfully. "I still remember every single thing those guys used to say to me." I nodded. "Yeah. And I guarantee they barely remember any of it." That sentence hit hard because it's true. For bullies, cruelty is often casual, disposable, entertainment. For the people targeted, though, those moments stick permanently, especially during high school, when everybody's still figuring out who they are. Ethan continued, "I used to spend so much energy wondering why they cared so much about making me miserable." "What do you think now?" He shrugged. "Honestly, I think some people are just terrified of anybody different." Probably true. Tyler and his friends acted like Ethan's existence personally offended them, but deep down, I think they just enjoyed feeling powerful. Mocking someone else made them feel secure in their own social status. Classic insecure bully behavior. The funniest part? Ethan ended up doing genuinely cool things with his life. His artwork started getting featured in local galleries near his university. He built real friendships, real confidence. Meanwhile, Tyler was still trying to relive high school social energy while handing out lattes inside Target. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with service jobs, but there is something deeply ironic about someone who spent years acting superior, ending up humbled by adulthood anyway. I never saw Tyler again after that day. But honestly, I didn't need to, because the revenge itself wasn't really about humiliating him. It was refusing to give him validation. No nostalgia, no friendliness, no pretending the past didn't happen just because time passed.
A few months after the Starbucks incident, I honestly stopped thinking about Tyler most of the time. Life got busy. Classes, work, family stuff. And Ethan kept thriving at college, which genuinely made me happy every time we talked. He sent me photos of paintings he was working on, weird art installations around campus, and screenshots of conversations with professors who actually respected him. It was like watching somebody finally breathe normally after years underwater. One night while gaming online together, we somehow ended up talking about high school again. Not in a dramatic trauma-dumping way, more like two people looking back on a bizarre phase of life that somehow felt both distant and embarrassingly recent at the same time. "You know what I still don't understand?" I asked. "Why bullies always act friendly later?" Ethan laughed immediately. "Oh my God, seriously? No, like genuinely, what is the psychology there?" He thought for a second. "I think they rewrite history in their heads." Honestly, that made sense, because nobody wants to view themselves as the villain in someone else's story. People soften their own memories over time. What felt cruel to the victim becomes just joking around to the person who caused it. Tyler probably remembered himself as some edgy teenager teasing classmates. Meanwhile, Ethan remembered sitting in bathrooms between classes trying not to cry. Perspective changes everything. "I used to think maybe I was overreacting," Ethan admitted quietly. "That surprised me." "You?"
Yeah, because everybody acted like I should just ignore it. That part hit me harder than anything else, because he was right. Teachers ignored most of it, students laughed awkwardly instead of speaking up. Even decent people sometimes stayed silent because confrontation felt uncomfortable, and silence protects bullies more than anybody else. I wish I'd said more back then, I admitted. Ethan shook his head immediately. You did enough. No, I didn't. You were there, he said firmly. That mattered. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan smirked. Besides, you publicly factory reset Tyler's ego. That's worth something. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my headset. Honestly, the more time passed, the funnier the Starbucks moment became in my memory. Not because it ruined Tyler's life or anything dramatic. It absolutely didn't. But because it flipped the power dynamic for once. Back in high school, Tyler controlled interactions. He controlled the tension. He decided who felt awkward and who felt accepted. At Starbucks, suddenly he was the uncomfortable one, desperately trying to reconnect while I acted completely indifferent. And indifference hits harder than anger sometimes. Anger at least acknowledges someone mattered. Pretending not to know him? That suggested he wasn't memorable enough to keep space in my brain. Brutal. A year later, I ran into another old classmate at a grocery store, and somehow Tyler came up during conversation. Oh yeah, she said casually, he was kind of a jerk in school. Kind of. I almost laughed. Amazing how people minimize things afterwards, like cruelty expires over time. Then she added something interesting. I heard he tried reaching out to a bunch of people after graduation because he realized nobody liked him anymore. That made way too much sense. High school had given Tyler a built-in audience. Once adulthood hit, suddenly nobody cared about his social status anymore. People moved on, grew up, and apparently he struggled with that. Again, I don't wish misery on the guy. I genuinely hope he matured eventually. I hope he learned empathy. I hope he looks back at some of his behavior and cringes violently. That would actually be healthy. But growth doesn't erase consequences, and it definitely doesn't entitle someone to forgiveness or friendship from the people they hurt. That's the part a lot of former bullies don't understand. You don't get to decide when someone else is over it, especially when you never apologized in the first place. A while after that conversation, Ethan invited me to his first small gallery showing near campus. I drove 3 hours to attend because there was absolutely no way I was missing it. And honestly, seeing his work displayed professionally almost made me emotional. People stood around genuinely admiring his art, asking thoughtful questions, complimenting his technique. Watching him confidently explain his work to strangers felt surreal compared to the exhausted kid I knew in high school constantly defending his own identity. At one point during the event, Ethan pulled me aside smiling. You know what's funny? What? If high school me saw this, he wouldn't believe it. I looked around the gallery. You earned it. He got quiet for a second, then said something that stuck with me. I think surviving people like Tyler taught me to stop caring about approval eventually. That's probably true for a lot of people who survive bullying. Eventually, you realize cruel people don't deserve authority over your self-worth. And honestly, that realization is way more powerful than revenge. Still, pretending not to know Tyler at Starbucks? Absolutely hilarious. 10 out of 10. Would emotionally inconvenience again.